The Australian Alps Walking Track is without a doubt one of Australia's most spectacular, remote and challenging through hikes. Traversing near 700 kilometres of rugged, remote alpine country, this track moves through the ACT, New South Wales and Victoria, giving hikers the opportunity to climb the highest peaks in each state and territory, follow ridges, walk exposed high plains, through dense vegetation and stunning snow gum woodlands. It also explores Namadgi, Kosciusko, Alpine and Baw National Parks, as well as a number of remote wilderness areas. There is very little access to towns for the duration, passing nearby to only a few small ski villages, so it does require hikers to be fully self-sufficient and happy to navigate in changeable weather on trail that ranges everywhere from road and walking tracks to faint footpads, animal tracks, and dense fire regrowth with seemingly no trail at all. I spent just 28 days completing this trail solo during February and March, walking SOBO or southbound from Namadgi to Walhalla, and invite you now to join me in sharing this incredible hiking adventure. In the ACT, I head out to Namadgi Visitor Centre and the trailhead where I would sign in and leave my car. I then, feeling very excited for the journey ahead, head out into the national park, carrying 10 days of food and everything else I will need to be self-sufficient for this month-long adventure. Heading with a heavy pack straight uphill, but thankfully with great trail to follow, it's not long before I'm treated to my first open views at Cypress Pine Lookout. I pass through open fields of wildlife. Don't take long to get the shoes dirty in the mud with water running after the past day's rain, over granite boulders, and with storm clouds coming in, and quite a short, easy day at the Honeysuckle Creek campground, surrounded by wallabies. This will be my last bookable managed campground with facilities for a long while, but finish the night very excited for what's to come. Starting the morning for day 2, I was very lucky that I hadn't ended up getting a storm overnight, leaving my tent dry so I could head straight out on trail today, past huge granite boulders and towards the Auroral River. After following hills, the countryside opens up here to grassy paddocks of wildflowers everywhere. On the road, I could easily wade through the water to cross the shallow river and spotted plenty of happy kangaroos along the way. Still in open country, I stopped off at the Rowley's hut site, then headed back uphill via dirt roads and onto walking trail to make my way through the bush. This section was kind of swampy, but thankfully made it really easy for me to get drinking water, as you do have to collect and filter your own throughout the duration of this hike. More granite sections and wildlife as I made my way towards Cotter Hut, now with huge storm clouds rolling in. Reaching the creek and hut, I was pleasantly surprised to actually meet some rangers out here. They were super sweet and offered to let me stay, having received large hail in the storm I had avoided the night before, but with a fair few daylight hours left, continued up the steep hilly section of track to reach Murray Gap. It did unfortunately start raining probably just a kilometre out from where I could camp, and was super swampy here despite the alpine feel. Nonetheless, it was a nice spot, and with the rain coming down, I literally threw everything in my tent in the flattest spot I could quickly find and jumped in to cozy up for the night. Waking up early to a beautiful sunrise, I had much better weather, but still a wet tent after yesterday's rain, so left it to dry for the morning while I headed off on a side trip across the swampy Murray Gap to summit Bimberry Trig Peak. There is very little trail up here, as it's a bit out of the way for day walkers and not actually a part of the Alps track, but does have a few marker ribbons and great views of where I just camped. Unfortunately, the higher I got, the more the clouds rolled in, but being the highest peak in the ACT, I wasn't going to miss the opportunity to summit this one. There's a cool spot to stop at the top, and I'd imagine normally great views, but even in the fog, I still had a lot of fun making it to the top and back. Clouds clearing down lower, I spotted the first of many snakes I would see on this hike, just soaking up the sun. Packed up my tent and had a food break before heading back on trail to cross the state border to New South Wales and move into Kosciusko National Park. I filtered water and stopped at Oldfield's Hut, a beautiful historic hut and just one of the many I am so excited to see out here. I had hilly road walking for the afternoon through bush, then fields, before passing huge groups of brumbies on the open flats, and getting another little afternoon storm as I walked through to Bill Jones' hut just a short way off the AAWT.
Oh, soggy, but made it through.
Very grateful for the shelter, I had stunning sunset colour and camped on the dirt veranda to avoid a wet tent again from the rain. A thick fog rolled in the late afternoon and I spent the night listening to brumbies and wild dogs howling nearby. Incredibly foggy leaving Bill Jones' hut, and pretty unreal to watch the brumbies running across the hills as I made my way back to the trail. There was lots of evidence of dingoes and dogs around this morning on the trail, and of course more horses in the area. Planning to cover about 33 k's today, I got water from a creek and followed hilly but nice open road walking through to Hainsworth Hut, which was a nice stop off and interesting to check out inside, before continuing on again to Ghost Gully Campground to enjoy the shade. After having some road walking, the next section of trail is unmarked over rolling hills.
I'm literally in the middle of nowhere up here. I've got no trails, no marker, but I'll show you around. It's beautiful.
And like much of the trail already, comes with beautiful views and wild horses through to the Murrumbidgee River. I believe after heavy rain that this could be difficult to cross, however, thankfully with shoes off I had no trouble here in the shallow water. Back on Parks Roads, I passed a nice but exposed campsite with another smaller creek crossing, then walked past huge groups of brumbies and rabbits in the open fields for the afternoon following snowy hydro works and roads. I finished the day camping at Witz's hut just on sunset. As many of the national parks huts, like this one, have historic significance, it is requested that you sleep in them only as emergency shelters, but outside had a beautiful full moon shining through my tent. With a cold, rainy morning, I had breakfast inside Witz's hut and watched the brumbies while I had my hot chocolate. Certainly not a bad way to start the day, and extra appreciated to have the shelter with lightning and thunder quickly rolling in. Catching a break in the weather, I said goodbye to this gorgeous historic hut and headed out on trail through the hills and trees. Moving along trail with the sun finally shining, I reached the Yukonbean River. This was freezing to cross, but also only knee-deep at most and narrow, so no real issue. I also hit the Snowy Mountains Highway here briefly for a change and followed it through to Kyandra, a historic town with a few remaining old buildings to stop and visit. At this point, I was still carrying another 5 days worth of food, as I did not have food boxes in place, but if you did alternatively have someone supporting you on this hike who could meet you for a resupply or to check in, this would be a pretty perfect spot for it with such easy vehicle access. Leaving the road behind, I headed back up steep management trails to climb into the hills for the afternoon. There were great views up here and very changeable weather from rain clouds to full sun, with the open exposed walking now following cross-country ski trails. I eventually turned off on a side track down to Broken Dam Hut, which had been rebuilt after sadly being burnt down. After initially being hesitant to make the detour, on arriving I instantly fell in love with this place. It was actually unreal, so well maintained and just so cute hidden in the hills. I got cold fresh water here from a natural well near the hut and had the most amazing clear skies. Enjoyed dinner in the grass under the sunset colours and really just the most perfect night here with not a soul around. As far as huts to camp at go, this would be my pick of the trail. Waking up to a very foggy morning, I didn't have much view, but a gorgeous veranda to snuggle up on for breakfast after a freezing night. Packing up, I headed out and around Tabletop Mountain, following trail that edges around the summit and looks back at last night's camp. So just following fire trails around Tabletop Mountain at the moment, but if you look back over here into the valley, just off in the distance there, that is actually Broken Dam Hut where I started this morning. So much clearer now that the fog has lifted, but just beautiful up here today. Much of today's walk is on Management Trail and was quite exposed, having previously been badly affected by fires. The countryside was full of wildflowers and clear views through the dead alpine trees overlooking the northern edge of Lake Yukonbean before crossing roads, walking under burnt out power lines, across open fields, and over hills for the afternoon. All being so exposed, the sun was pretty rough today and the few small water crossings were extra nice to cool down and fill up drinking water. Finishing the day at McKay's hut, I still had a near full moon and clear skies before another freezing night of camping. Now a week in, I enjoyed the sunny morning, drying out my tent and having breakfast on the veranda, deciding today to cover about 30 kilometers. Leaving this beautiful spot, I headed back on trail for what was shaping up to be another hot but perfect day for walking. I had a few small alpine creek crossings and gorgeous mountain views as I made my way to my first stop at O'Keefe's hut. This was an incredible historic hut and definitely one of my favorites, with the walls inside lined with stories and newspapers. Leaving the hut, I walked through the Jagungal Wilderness area and decided with the heat, despite being tempted, not to summit Mount Jagungal, but instead just enjoy its views and carry on around it. This, I'm sure, would be a great section to explore, even if you could only do part of the trail. More walking and gorgeous clear creek crossings for the afternoon, passed by Grey Mare's hut, and on over streams and mountains on repeat. At this point, I was just leaving my shoes on through the water and figured they'd dry in the sun with crossings being so frequent. Rising up on the hills, I could now overlook Valentine Falls in the distance, then drop down on the other side now to cross Valentine Creek. I finished the day at the super cute red Valentine hut painted adorably to match its name. Once again, I had not a soul around and enjoyed dinner and sunset for the night in this incredible spot. Starting the morning at this beautiful hut, I had breakfast and again a little over 30 k's to cover, so hit the track. This is a nice area, but sadly a lot of dead trees before my first stop at the Schlink Hut, or Schlink Hilton as it's otherwise commonly known. I thought this place had kind of a weird vibe, so I wouldn't really want to camp here, but it was cool to check out before crossing over the pass and heading down to White's River Hut, from where I could cross over Kosciusko's main range. Officially, the AAWT continues on easy to follow road walking around the range, but having the alternative to walk over the top, that didn't really appeal to me. Not to mention the weather was perfectly clear to navigate, so I'd be crazy not to take this opportunity to get up there. At the hut, I met a group of men doing a shorter group hiking trip who told me they'd attempted the range a few summers back and actually ended up getting helicoptered off the range after breaking, I think it was an ankle or leg, navigating through the uneven alpine vegetation. So the crossing isn't necessarily to be taken lightly. Anyway, with perfect weather and a long walk around to technically follow the AAWT, I was convinced I could make it over the top, and I'm so glad I did take the opportunity because the views were unreal. Reaching an area called the Rolling Ground, there is no trail, so you do have to navigate and of course tread lightly to limit environmental impact to the alpine vegetation as much as possible. But from there, it's pretty straightforward to cross Concett Stephen Pass, Mount Tate, Anton Anderson Saddle, and so on for view after view over the range. I eventually rejoined the AAWT official track at the main range walking track and had hills of stonewalk and boardwalk path for the afternoon, overlooking the beautiful glacial lakes of Kosciusko. This would be quite easily accessible just from Thredbo and somewhere I'd love to return even just for a day walk. Camping is quite restricted here though, so I made sure to stay away from the lake catchment zones and had a very red sunset before freezing night, being in such exposed high country, but ready to head up Mount Kosciusko tomorrow. Waking up in the dark and beyond excited, I quickly packed up and set out to climb Mount Kosciusko for sunrise. This had been on my bucket list for years now, so it was pretty exciting to finally be able to make it happen. Kosciusko is by no means one of Australia's toughest mountains. In fact, it's quite an easy climb and very accessible with amazing trail, but it is our highest and that just feels really special to me. It was absolutely freezing, but so worth it, somehow ending up with the summit completely to myself. I honestly just couldn't believe the views up here and that no one else was up yet to enjoy it. I rugged up and had coffee at the summit, watching the colours change and cloud inversions in the distant valleys. Then started to make my way down to Thredbo, which would be my first town and little bit of civilization since being out here. Absolutely stunning up there this morning. I'm so excited to have made it up there for sunrise. It was freezing though, so I'm headed down to Thredbo now. I headed through Rawson Pass and with the chairlift not operating, walked down Merritt's Nature Trail. Somehow I had ended this section with extra food left, so had lunch in town, then headed to the post office to pick up my first food resupply, which I had sent to myself pre-starting my hike. From here, I'll carry another 10 days worth of food through to the next post office in Hotham Village, most of which is dehydrated for obvious reasons and includes things like dried fruit, dehydrated meals, noodles, rice, oats, muesli bars, and so on. I was also able to grab some limited fresh food from the shop in town before setting back out along the river. Few snakes for the afternoon as I followed Cascade's track and some nice scenery as I made my way to Cascade Hut for the night. Once again, here I was away from people and camping completely on my own, but in a great place and with lovely surroundings. After a quiet morning at Cascade Hut, I packed up and headed out on trail for day 10. This is my last day walking in New South Wales and where I'll move into more of a bushwalk after the stunning alpine scenery of the past week. The morning's trail had quite a bit of fire damage and risk of falling timber, but was easy going on management trails. There was also lots of bird life around before my first stop at Cascade Flat. I met a man out mountain bike riding here, so had company for my break for a nice change. Then headed on through more bushwalking to the tin mine huts. It was really hot out today, so this made a great lunch stop in the shade. The area and 2 huts here, like all the huts I visited so far, were well maintained and a great place to look around and in this case refill water. The afternoon's walk was very similar on dirt road and through trees dropping branches everywhere. I saw one horse not far from camp which unfortunately got pretty spooked by my presence, so said sorry to him and moved by as he watched me from the tree line. I then carried on downhill to finish the day at Kosciusko Flat. Beautiful sunset and camp here right on the start of the Murray River, and a nice spot for a quiet dinner in my tent surrounded by grassy fields. Packing up camp, I crossed the Murray, and yes, you can literally step across it here, which is probably not how you're used to seeing it, but cool to get to experience it this way. This crossing starts my journey through Victoria and leaves Kosciusko behind to move into Alpine National Park. After triple checking that the trail was still open, I'll now be walking for the next 2 days through an aerial shooting zone, which is a bit of a weird thought heading out. I had plenty of management trail walking, checking out animal tracks along the way, good bush country views, and lunch at Buller Creek in the shade. Before heading off now back onto walking trail, this started off well for me, but very quickly the trail became less evident and more of just a scramble in the right direction down into the valley. Spotted some brumbies here and made my way along the overgrown valley, again really just heading in the right direction through the bush. Hitting 4-wheel drive tracks, I had steep hills for the afternoon and kept a good eye on the trail, having to go out of my way not to disturb a few snakes. Nice views from the hills, then drop down to SOBO Creek to cross and call it a day, shooing off brumbies to camp remotely by the water. I had a cool wet morning on my tiny patch of flat ground by the creek, then followed along it, log hopping, bushwalking, and creek crossing my way forward.
Okay, I'm across. That water is freezing this morning, so I'm awful glad I'm not swimming in it, but it is nice and cold to drink.
Onto a steep, scrubby, poorly defined uphill slog.
It is really warming up out here this morning. I'm just walking up a ridge, which certainly isn't helping. However, I'm still in Alpine National Park in the aerial shooting operations zone. I've been walking through it since yesterday and I should be all good on the trail. But interestingly, this morning you can hear them firing in the distance. As I said, it should be all good for me, but it's a bit of a weird feeling. I'm completely surrounded by scrub. But yeah, I'm nearly out of here. I'm gonna keep moving.
Crossing road, excited to be out of this scrub and onto better trail, my hopes were quickly dashed as I found it didn't really exist. This area had obviously been quite badly hit by fires and did have a few trail markers, but as far as I could see was easier just to follow in horse and deer tracks continuing upward. Here I reached Misery Trail, and let me say, having any sort of trail at this point was far from misery. It was easy walking and appreciated on steep downhill slopes. Reaching Buckwong Creek, I saw a deer and was quite sadly met with a number of horse carcasses in the field by the water. Quickly moving on, I did stop at the hut and was able to have a much needed lunch break in the open. One last push for the afternoon, past a few snakes, and finished at Buenba Creek, walking through the grassy fields to first find a clearing to pitch my tent, then amongst long grass and curious kangaroos to find water for the night. I had heard this was a popular area for night hunting, but thankfully only had a cute possum to keep me company for dinner and the night. Day 13, I move into the most notoriously overgrown section of the Alps track. And concerningly, it looked like it was going to rain all morning. Heading out regardless, I walked from camp straight out into long, overgrown grass fields and followed kangaroo tracks the best I could. From here, I was able to follow the river, but still with no track whatsoever. This section was very swampy and slow going, fighting my way over fallen trees, through blackberries, prickles, burrs, and long grass. I all but ran into a deer here, with us both startling each other in the thick swampy vegetation, and thankfully spotted a few snakes before stepping on them. My next challenge is then to head uphill to Johnny's Top, which started quite well but again quickly became overgrown, moving into thick fiery growth and a steep bush bash for most of the way. There is occasional marker tape and old burnt trail markers to follow here, but as you could imagine, again it was pretty slow going. Reaching Johnny's Top, there is a beautiful open grassy pad, road, a water tank, and a communications tower. Covering just 11 kilometers, this was by far my shortest day on trail, but decided to take the rest of the day off to camp up early with good access to water, dry out my tent, and enjoy a few treats before heading to bed listening to the deer nearby. Two weeks in, with some beautiful sunrise colours, a hot jockey, and porridge for breakfast, the day was off to a great start. And even more exciting this morning, getting to head straight down road and walk above the clouds as I made my way off Johnny's Top. Shaping up to be a warm one, it didn't take long to spot a snake, and then a few deer as well, which are clearly quite active in the area, having listened to them all night. Back on walking trail, the snakes kept a good eye on me, and I headed down towards Morass Creek, where I was pretty grateful to just jump my way across without having to lose the shoes. One more loose up and down bush stint for the afternoon to finally cross the Midamida River. There's a beautiful suspension bridge here to get up and overlook the water and camp on its far side at Taylor's Crossing for a peaceful night. This morning by the river was freezing cold to pack up, but pretty cool to be able to overlook the steamy water from the suspension bridge. Then out onto four-wheel drive tracks to start the day.
So I'm just walking out from Midda River this morning. It was absolutely freezing, so nice to be back in the patches of sunshine. There are a few deer around this morning, and I've also heard a fair few gunshots while I've been walking, so I'd say there's some shooting or hunting going on as well nearby, but otherwise a really beautiful morning out here.
Heading hopefully away from any hunting, I have plenty of steep hills ahead. Whilst I'll only cover about 26 k's today, I will walk over 2,000 metres rise in elevation on a mix of dirt roads and bush trails. I personally find downhill can be slower when the terrain is this loose and steep, but it did bring me out to a beautiful, almost tropical feeling gully of ferns on Gill Creek. Reaching the bottom, of course, can only mean more uphill to come, so with a very steep start I kept walking and slowly log ducking and hopping my way out of the valley up to the Omeo Highway. For anyone curious about placing food drops on this walk, these are an example of typical resupply boxes which another hiker had obviously placed on the trail and already collected their food from. I don't unfortunately have this luxury, having started the hike so quickly and last minute to make it through the northern section before this year's major aerial shooting closures, but it's normally what people would do for this type of remote through hike. For the afternoon, I continue uphill to Mount Wills. It's steep and bushy with lots of logs to climb over, but also pretty rewarding with killer sunset colours and beautiful views of the surrounding mountains. There's also a hut up here which was a bit of a treat to be able to get out of the cold and cook inside before camping up for the night, ready to tackle more mountains again tomorrow. Waking up, it was literally freezing, but I made sure I was up for sunrise on Mount Wills, and just look at this view, it was absolutely stunning. Colours were just unreal and such an awesome vantage point to look at both where I had been and where I was heading.
Alright, inside now, just do some breakfast. It is so good to have this hut here to be able to get out of the wind, but beautiful up there this morning.
I had breakfast at the hut, then packed up and headed out through gorgeous alpine country and ferns on my way to Big River Saddle. There's good management trail walking from here, cute wildlife, and even picnic tables, making the perfect spot to stop for lunch. Moving into walking track, the views open up to overlook the valleys and ridges I've been following through from Mount Wills, before following along alpine plains and detouring now off the Alps track to reach the Cleve Cole Hut. This is an awesome hut managed by the Bogong Club and the perfect spot for me to pitch my tent, ditch most of my pack weight, and make the climb up over rolling hills for a sunset Mount Bogong summit. At the start of my hike, I had set myself the goal to make the side trips to summit the highest peaks in each state, first climbing Bimberry in the ACT, Kosciusko in New South Wales, and Mount Bogong being my final peak as the highest in Victoria. The colours and views up here made this even more special, with a freezing but perfect night to overlook the surrounding country. I carried up freeze-dried ice cream for an absolute treat to celebrate and finished the walk back by torchlight. I met a couple of overnight walkers and shared the hut for dinner before a cozy night in my tent under the stars. I was greeted this morning with the most beautiful sunrise, breakfast in bed because obviously I'm living a life of luxury, and also it's too cold to get out of my quilt. Then back off on trail to rejoin the AAWT at Madison's hut site. Easy trail walking for the morning to dip down into the valley and cross Big River. A swim would have been amazing here, but realistically it was freezing just even walking across. Then uphill again, climbing this time out of the valley to reach Roper's hut, which made a pretty cute lunch stop with its own little creek nearby. The trail flattens out from here, moving on tracks to overlook Falls Creek and having nice alpine views for the afternoon. Walking now on the Falls to Hotham Alpine Crossing Trail, this area is well marked and busy with a school group at Cope Hut, so continued last minute onto Cope Saddle, camping right next to the old emergency shelter on the open plains, having covered about 30 kilometres for the day. I had another freezing morning on the exposed plains, but thankfully heading out was able to easily follow along the Falls to Hotham track well marked by snow poles. With views of Hotham village slowly getting closer, I ducked into the valley, stopping briefly to enjoy the last of my snacks in the sun at Dibbon's Hut. Then continue steeply up the valley next to Derrick Hut. Then over the now very summery looking ski runs to finally reach Great Alpine Road. Here the AAWT continues away from town, but thankfully is only a few kilometres walk for me to detour down to the general store and post office to pick up my next resupply parcel and enjoy the luxury of having extra food. The road walk back out with a heavy pack, however, is a little rough and, in my opinion, a bit sketchy around the tight corners, passing by Mount Feathertop and more alpine huts. A nice lady was very kind to give me a lift the last few kilometres to get me off the road, but still had a pretty long day, covering around 37 kilometres with my detour into town. I spent the afternoon walking on four-wheel drive tracks, moving away from people and cars and back into the bush. Finishing with a beautiful sunset over the mountains, I found a small flat camp near Twins Water Tank and enjoyed more food for the night. Despite a cloudy start, I headed out again along a walking trail and ridgeline of old burnt trees, but with great views overlooking the surrounding peaks. Hitting four-wheel drive tracks, I met a group of 3 other hikers, also completing the Australian Alps Walking Track, and had a great time walking briefly with them and discussing the trail and their experiences on it so far. Many of the trail's huts have logbooks, and with this group having started from Namadgi about a week before me, it was pretty cool to finally meet the people I had been following on paper, especially with so few other thru hikers out here. Walking at different paces, we did go our own ways, but enjoyed some easy road walking and great open views today, as well as summiting Mount Selwyn in the sunshine. Stopping for water, we re-met up at Selwyn Water Tank, before sadly parting ways for the night, with me carrying on to cover a few more kilometres while feeling good to make tomorrow easier. I had a beautiful sunset and just a possum now to keep me company. I had the special treat of an orange for breakfast this morning, given to me by the lovely hikers I met yesterday, and unfortunately about a million mosquitoes to go with it, but still a great way to start the day. There's not much access to creeks and water sources going forward from here, so grabbed water from the hiker's tank by East Riley Road and carried on bush trails. Few logs to hop over, but good to follow through, up and down hills to Barry Saddle. Here there is thankfully another rainwater tank, but it is however at the bottom of my next big climb and the last reliable water source until Camp Creek, potentially a 12-hour walk away depending on your pace. With plenty of time, I made sure to hydrate as much as possible and cook noodles now to limit the extra water I'd have to carry. I was also pretty disappointed to find a hole in my filter bottle at this stage, so I had to do some emergency patchwork to be able to carry enough water through. I planned tonight to camp on top of the Viking, a beautiful, rugged and iconic landmark of the Victorian high country, and just a 5-kilometre uphill walk away. The track up was a bit of a scramble in places, but a lot of fun rock hopping my way from view to view. Reaching the top, I pitched my tent in what I'd now say was my favourite camp of the hike, had an unreal sunset, and was absolutely spoilt for views up here. I really don't think it gets much better than that. Waking up to beautiful clear skies for day 21, I spent all morning enjoying the views from the Viking, and I mean, just look at this spot. I had the mountains now all to myself, and honestly could have stayed all day just sitting on the cliffs. Heading over the top, I now had quite a steep descent down the rocks and through this rocky opening here, which is known as the chimney. I had heard all sorts of tips here about needing to lower your pack down and go certain ways, but I really found it no dramas even with a pack, so I wouldn't let that deter you from exploring this incredible area. Continuing down, I moved today through the Viking Saddle and on Bushy Trail towards the Razor, another iconic rock formation of this wilderness area, which can be explored further on a side trip if you have enough water. on past Mount Despair, through the Catherine Saddle, and on vehicle tracks through to my much appreciated next water source at Camp Creek. Filling up another 3 litres, I headed up and over Mount Speculation with beautiful views of the surrounding mountains. And over more rocks, steep edges, and helping ropes to finish the night camping on Mount Buggery, protected by trees but with beautiful sunset colours shining through. This morning I had sunrise colours and some beautiful but steep country ahead. From here I could look back over the Razor Viking wilderness where I walked yesterday and would move now onto the Crosscut Saw, which is another very sheer rocky ridgeline and named, I can only assume, for its continual sharp up and down climbs. Some unreal, uninterrupted views from here, and thankfully some cloud cover to help with the heatwave warnings I had been getting the past few days through this particularly dry stretch. There is an optional side trip down to a hut in this area, which I definitely look forward to visiting at some point, but not really wanting to add the extra kilometres at this stage, I decided to keep moving over Mount Howitt and Big Hill before dropping into a saddle. Ditching my pack here, I was curious to see just how dry the area was and headed down a gully to reach a known water source at Hellfire Creek, which was bone dry and very unencouraging. I did find a small puddle in the rocks and filtered some water from it to carry as an emergency backup, but really didn't like the look of it and didn't end up drinking it. For the afternoon, I walked on past Hell's Window, over Mount Magdala, and through more easy bushwalking to Kingbilly 1 and 2 for good clear views. Management tracks to follow for the afternoon, and thankfully a small amount of water flowing over the trail before walking the final few kilometres to Chester's Yard for the night. Camping up in not my favourite spot, but thankfully with a small water flow nearby and dinner in the grass. Now about 450 kilometres down, I filtered water, had breakfast and headed out, thankfully with cloud cover above after a few very exposed days. Walking on vehicle tracks, I quickly spotted a snake and made sure to keep a good eye out heading through the long grass. From here, I move uphill and start my climb up and down lots of mountain walking for the day, starting with Mount Clear, then Square Top, High Cone, and the Knobs before hitting Knobs Track. All very steep and loose underfoot with either leaf litter or loose gravelly rock, but with sections of recent track clearing done in the area was good to navigate through. I got a sprinkle of rain and enjoyed a few breaks with more views before jumping onto easy to follow vehicle tracks. Finding a decent flat open campsite along Knobs Track, and with more light sprinkles of rain, decided to call it an early night. Enjoyed dinner and jumped into bed before the mozzies came out. Making my way straight uphill this morning for Mount McDonald, I had wet vegetation and rocky climbs over what felt like a fair few false summits ducking up and down. It was cloudy and windy, but awesome views when I did reach the top. The weather had cooled down, and with a bit more rain overnight, I now had a bit of a break through this rough, dry section. The trail down was quite rocky and easy to lose, particularly lower, where I stumbled across this beautiful healthy snake. Back to easy navigation, I walked 4-wheel drive tracks to Low Saddle and was pretty excited to find this trickle of clear flowing water to the side of the road with no reliable water source for about another 35 kilometres without going off the trail. Filling up, I had soup for lunch and headed up now to Mount Sunday. Beautiful change with the ferns, but no real view, so carried on again on more 4-wheel drive tracks to Mount McKinty. With a lot of elevation, I was a little slow and arrived at my intended camp right on dark. I could see eyes glowing in my torchlight and ended up getting chased out by cows that literally followed me a good kilometre or two right through to the next campsite. Not going to lie, this was honestly scary because I couldn't see properly in the low fog, and only hear movement and see the eyes of something big following. The country here is really steep and rough, so I don't know where they came from, but this trail is full of surprises, so I spent the night wondering that at Rump Saddle. Waking up in a fog, you can now see where I ended up last night, thankfully with nothing following me, but a bit of a wet day ahead. Back to road walking, there wasn't much view, so shall cover about 29 k's and just enjoy the haze in the trees. I headed up Mount Shillinglaw, still no view, and down steeply into a valley to reach thick blackberries on the edge of Black River. I thought the log bridge here was just gorgeous, so stopped for lunch on the water before refilling. Then headed out and uphill with over 1,000 metres of elevation to climb for the afternoon. With a heavy pack and wet shoes, I didn't really mind just following roads on past Mount Shingleton, and had a bit of rain to finish the day setting up the tent at Fiddler's Green for an early night ready to snuggle up in the now cold weather. Wet tent again this morning, but weather was looking better. I headed straight to check out an old private hut just out of the way and continued on following roads up to Mount Victor, which was unfortunately too bushy to have much view. Following the Victor Spur, I had plenty of markers and good trail for a change, as I am today walking in the Thomson River catchment, which means limited camping and restrictions to protect water quality. I saw just one snake before coming out at Red Jacket, a historic gold mining site on the Jordan River, and stopping for lunch by the water. Back on trail, I was really lucky here to spot this guy. I'm not sure if he was a dingo or dingo dog cross, but looked really healthy, which was nice to see as he was checking me out before moving back into the bush. For the afternoon, I have steep hills to climb with lots of elevation up and then down again to reach the Thomson River. This is one of the catchment area's few restricted campgrounds, so it was where I pulled up in a clearing for the night. Day 27 is a big day, covering 33.5 kilometres and will be my second last day on trail. It stayed quite dark and cool in the valley at Thomson River this morning, but packing up I crossed this great log bridge and headed out through the rest of the catchment area to meet roads and overlook the Eastern Weir. On steep roads I headed up to Trig Point and this old trig marker, warming myself up with the hills as I headed now into forestry and my final section of bushy trail, overgrown with beautiful ferns, until finally reaching the boundary of Bawbaw National Park. There's a designated walkers camp area here where I stopped for lunch and electrolytes before having the luxury of well-maintained national park tracks to wander through snow gums with little birds everywhere. At this point, I had very little food or battery left and quite limited phone service, but had gotten in contact with the trail's Track Angel group and gotten confirmation that I would be able to get picked up from the track tomorrow, which was, I think, the first time it actually sunk in that I would be finishing this walk. I passed Mount Whitelaw and stopped briefly for more snacks at Mount Whitelaw hut site, with only its beautiful old chimney left standing. Lots of little ups and downs on hills for the afternoon, past the rock shelter campsite, and onto a nice spot under the trees at Talbot hut site, ready to finish my month-long journey through the Alps tomorrow. Waking up under snow gums for my final day, I have now just 25 kilometres to walk to reach the end of the trail. It was chilly while I packed up and grabbed water, then headed out passing Mount Erica and down towards Mushroom Rocks. Funnily enough, this small section at the rocks here is the only piece of the trail I had already walked. I did it on a day walk just exploring towards the start of my road trip around Australia, and had never even done an overnight walk at that point, let alone considered or even heard of the Alps track. Enjoying the very last of my food, I walked on past Mount Erica car park, down dirt road, and on good trail to O'Shea's mill site with its beautiful little waterfall. On to once again meet the Thomson River and detour around the old Poverty Point Bridge, crossing the river instead on the road. Just a few kilometres to go,
Okay, I've got maybe 1.5 kilometers to go. I'm so close now.
And here I have my first views of the gorgeous little historic gold mining town, Walhalla, where I will finish. There isn't much of a grand finale in such a small place, but you reach this signboard, which after walking at nearly 700 kilometers, to me was a pretty cool marker of how far I'd come.
Check this out.
The final few track markers lead down steps into town and seem to just run out at a small board showing your location and leaving me officially now off the trail. Feeling incredibly grateful and I think honestly a bit overwhelmed to be finished and even back in a town after so much remote walking. This trail certainly does not come without challenges, but I feel after walking for just 28 days and completing my AAWT journey 2 days ahead of schedule that I was incredibly lucky with the weather, the wildlife, the lack of injury or even blisters, and to have had such great interactions with the few other hikers I did get to meet. Without public transport in Walhalla, I'd also like to say a massive thank you to the track angel who so kindly got me from the trail to Traralgon, to a much enjoyed shower and dinner back in civilization, and to the couple who got me back to my car from Canberra to Namadgi to continue on with my next adventures. The Australian Alps Walking Track is without a doubt one of my favourite walking experiences to date, so I'd like to thank you all for joining me for this journey and highly encourage anyone thinking of getting out there to absolutely go for it. Happy hiking all!